Fear Street is a Goosebumps or scary stories to tell in the dark but without the chains of being kid-friendly. Sometimes the storyline is lacking in believability or maybe the characters aren't fleshed out great, but overall I think these movies are insanely fun. I love the vibe the Goosebumps or Stit have, but they always were way too corny with the good guys win and nothing bad actually happening for me to fully enjoy them. Fear Street has been like watching those shows but with the chains removed. Super fun stuff. Edit: I am aware that Fear Street is from the books by R.L. Stine and are made for teens, not kids. I am just pointing out that the movies give me that vibe big time, and I love it. It feels weird whenever something really violent happens. The movie feels like other young adult horror movies I've seen before, then suddenly a 9-year-old gets axed to death. Honestly, thought she was the best written and most fleshed out character in that movie. I honestly expected her to be the final girl. My only thought was, hey, the ambulance is available, why not drive around while she odds instead of waiting in a supermarket? My thoughts exactly. And while you're at it, why not put some of her blood on a shirt that you can toss if shit hits the fan? Yeah, there are definitely a ton of plot holes when you think about it critically. It annoyed me in the first one, but I have to appreciate it for what it is. A fun teen horror series. The SFX really stood out for me, at least in the first movie. Haven't seen the second yet. The first kill gets a minor knife slash to the stomach, and from the sound of it I expected her to bleed out in a few seconds. The next two attacks were even worse. Yeah, it doesn't make sense. The plot and narrative and drama is nothing but childish. Then it's ultra violent and has nudity? If they're aimed at adults, maybe don't make the cast children and pay a bit more attention to the script. Casting children doesn't make an adult movie any less adult. See Logan, Deadpool 2 and it. They all have a prominent child actors in them but doesn't detract from the adultness. Now all three options also have great scripts, but Logan and it treated the children as far more intelligent and far more well-rounded than Fear Street has done so far, though. It's very confusing to see young actors spouting dialogue / running through narrative devices that are childish as hell, then seeing them go through bread cutters or get axed to pieces. That's what I meant, sorry for suggesting it's because they're using children. Wait, so the children are acting like children, and it's bad that they get murdered in a slasher? The gruesome murder kind of makes it a film for adults, not kids. You mean the tone that grows through the movie and shifts to adult instead of starting at 11 and having nowhere else to go, aka the Rob Zombie problem. Open up with extreme amounts of gore and torture. Starting at 11 and then have nowhere to go from there. Looks great, plays out well and is more than memorable, but pops too early and has little emotional variance. It's the opposite of the Audition problem, where little happens and then there's an extreme and intense amount of horror in the last few minutes. Love both of them, but they each represent an extreme in emotionality. Oh, sorry for misunderstanding, yeah, that is a good point. But still fun as hell, lol. Reminded me of Freaky the Bread Cutter kill. I guess I went in with low expectations since I grew up with the books, and even though I loved them, I knew they weren't exactly masterpieces. Same goes for the Goosebumps show and movies. I was expecting a Sabrina level of effects and entertainment, and the first two movies exceeded my expectations so far. Of course Fear Street doesn't come close to Scream, which is a modern masterpiece emo, but I still think it's a solid 7.5. I agree, but both Scream and especially Paranorman have likable characters, or characters you enjoy watching, which is what I was comparing it to. And what made Scream stand out was its clever writing, while this movie was fairly standard and predictable. When I hear a new slasher get compared to Scream, I expect at least some satire or a twist. As a fan of the books, I thought they captured the vibe of R.L. Stine's writing very well. It was really cheesy, and yet Stine didn't hold back a lot of the time with the brutality or the horror. Somehow I missed this whole series growing up, didn't know anything about it until the Netflix movies, but liked Goosebumps growing up and liked the movies. Do you think the books would still hold up today? Would it be weird to read them as 30? Ha! I'm 30 and grew up with them and still read them to this day. They're kinda hastily written schlock, no offense to Mr. R.L. Stine, but they are fun, twisty, and regardless of the author calling them PG, sometimes shockingly violent. Anyone else annoyed by a girl walking around after the bone broke out of her leg? And since when does CPR help with blood loss? For the most part the movies are entertaining. But who is dumb enough to write this shit in? Initiating CPR on a blood loss victim can double and even triple the chances of survival, and every minute CPR is not initiated, chances of survival drop by 7%. If you find a stab victim, you need to stop the bleeding and perform CPR. I laughed after he said acetaminophen because I knew right then and there, the something like 15 pills he took was well beyond liver toxicity levels. Especially for one sitting. Probably wouldn't have killed him, but his liver would have seen better days. Who is dumb enough to take this too seriously when it's literally meant to be dumb and play on tropes? The writers did a fantastic job staying true to it and clearly understood what made slashers from the 70s and 90s work. Can you imagine how quick everything would wrap up if the characters were actually competent and logical? I'm still bummed they killed off Kate. She was easily the best character out of the group and a much better final girl vibe than either of the two main girls. R.I.P. Bread. I just watched the first one and enjoyed it well enough, but I definitely found the main character pretty unlikable and mean. Like confronting her ex-girlfriend at the vigil and shaming her for being bisexual and having a boyfriend after they broke up. While the boyfriend was an asshole for driving with his friends and throwing stuff at the school bus, Sam chucks a goddamn watercolor on his windshield, directly causing the accident that led to ex-girlfriend being targeted by the witch. Now, having a protagonist with negative, unlikable qualities is not bad as long as they receive forward progression during the plot of the story. Except in Fear Street, the main character basically stays the same and still succeeds in the end. I haven't watched the second one yet, so I guess we'll see if the main character evolves more. Edit, can I get 3 cheers for you /Roz0 or Fox everyone? If you cross him, he'll argue with you, project his insecurities on you, and then stalk your Reddit profile and make rude remarks on old posts and comments you leave behind. And by the way, I get all the help I need, thank you very much. Receive forward progression. Yes, thank you for saying this. Dina would be a much more compelling protagonist if she acknowledged her toxic qualities. I doubt any of the writers even thought when Dina confronted Sam was biphobic, so I don't think we see her acknowledge that. Her obsession with Sam led to the deaths of multiple, 2 of which she is responsible for, but as long as she has Sam in the end, everything was worth it. It is even worse, people aren't really noticing that this is a toxic relationship, and Dina without a doubt is showing signs of being abusive. The story would have been much more impactful if Dina showed some foresight and realized she is not a good partner for Sam and should let her go, but nope, Dina gets to lay on the bed with the love of her life, and listen to her mixtape and have look at her card that was pretty much emotional blackmail. But that vigil scene just shows people not doing their research. The 90s weren't some progressive decade. Like Dina yelling at Sam for not being out, like did you forget the AIDS crisis only recently ended, Dina? Not to mention the amount of murders committed against queer people in the 90s that were happening during the timeline of this film. I mean, we are talking about emotional teenagers dealing with shit a lot adults struggle with, and you are mad with how she reacted to her emotions? Do you remember your first love? When you lose them, you're young and dumb and think the world is